I recall that at the beginning of the conversation, you were very on top of any time people said practice, you would shut it down immediately. And I think you've relaxed quite a bit since then. And I hate it also. And I love a pedant. So I appreciated that. I think um, I try to use language to be precise. And I think a lot of artists try to use language to both describe what they're doing, but also to try to sort of elevate it beyond their own understanding. And practice isn't necessarily this, but it feels like part of this sort of art speak language where people don't really investigate why they're using this word. I think that when people say it, they're sort of trying to make it sound like everything is part of their art making. You know, I started thinking this when someone described teaching as part of my practice,
Yeah.
which I thought was hilarious and sort of the way that people kind of try to erase monetary and financial concerns from artists. No, teaching is how I pay bills. If I were independently wealthy, I would not teach this much. I need to. It's not part of my practice that I have to eat. But there's this weird discomfort with acknowledging that artists have to have a job in America. By and large, vanishingly few artists can get away with no outside source of income. I think it's part of that sort of this like flattening of everything into art making. But then it also means that everything you do somehow has to be considered part of the art making.
Yeah.
Like all of the books you read and the places you go and people you hang out with become part of these same considerations as opposed to, that's life, but maybe art making is an aspect of it, but not everything is art making. I think it's also really part of the sort of post studio movement, which I don't really identify with. I'm very much an object maker. And I think when you consider everything art making, then it really distances yourself from everything. Everything becomes this considered performance and you're not really allowing yourself to experience it anymore. Do you know what I mean?
It's weird right now in terms of this word because Alex and Theo Grabaudy Plitas are the last episode that is out. They are a French couple living in the Champagne region of France, and I am fond of them both from the little that we know each other. And yet, Alex spoke quite a bit about their life being their art.
Hmm.
And she did use the P word quite a bit. And at one point, Theo said, "You just said it again." And she said, "Oh, I did." So I think they're light about it. They're light about most things. I think for me, my experience, particularly with people on the show who have used the P word a lot, tend to be very serious. And I have a problem not only with the overuse of the P word, the overuse of inflated language, but also this sort of grave seriousness around art, which to me, if nothing else, suggests a lack of a sense of humor.
I think part of that is what we were talking about earlier is that art has become for many people the replacement for a non-secular sense of importance and belonging, but also because the larger society art is so unimportant that we kind of overcompensate with this extreme self-importance.
That is so well said. Yeah. Overcompensation. Okay. So, do we name this video the P word explained?
I don't know that I
Overcompensation?
explained it. I don't have a New York Times subscription, so I didn't read the article that you linked to me about the P word. I read the first little bit before the pop up came up asking me for a subscription.
Right.
She probably has a better explanation for it. I always defer to writers for actual words and communication with words. I think visual artists, we don't go into visual art because we're super good at writing, even if
Yeah.
it ends up being this thing that's demanded of us. I think that is the real explanation for the P word, is that so much of contemporary art is writing, is trying to transform your visual art experience into the kind of language and tokens of theory and philosophy without the training in those things.
Yeah.
And so instead of having the training, we have like these words that become like these larger signifiers of things. You know, how often do you hear painters talk about the drip? And it's this much bigger concept than just like a physical drip of paint. And the practice is sort of similar to that, but I think it's much harder to break down than a lot of the other sort of tokens of meaning that we exchange in our writing.
Right. Yeah, that was Roberta Smith you're referring to, and Peter Sheldall also wrote something about the P word, and I include both of links to both of those in the FAQ that I give guests before we record for people who are curious.
When we did the pre-interview, you and I brought up how I really resonate with that because
Yeah.
I am very invested in words and language. I just came back from Anderson Ranch, and one of our I like to do like a challenge in class, and our challenge one day was come up with the best art word, and you had to write the word and then a definition, and then the winner got a little prize.
I do not have any nominees right now for the best art speak word, but I will say that I listened to another podcast that does this segment called Overheards, and people write and leave voice messages of overheards they think out in the world. So this was the word that one person included in their sentence from an overheard: exacerbate. Big difference. Big difference.
Big difference, big
Yeah, yeah,
difference.
yeah, yeah. So,
I
but
think
that's my current art speak word.
problematize.
Right.
Tired of the problematize
Yeah.
being out there.
I mean, I can't let it go unsaid, but even though it's like it's a subtext running through all of this, but find me one press release that does not have something that will annoy us.
Oh, so true, so true. I
Yeah.
feel like we could talk for a long time. I don't want to just talk shit on other people who are also struggling to write because it's hard. I hate having to write about art because internally it feels so important, and then there's this moment when you start writing it out that you feel like this like defensiveness, and it becomes very hard to translate that importance and meaning when you're also kind of fighting it a little bit because being extremely sincere is vulnerable. And so it feels very mean spirited to just criticize other people and how they art speak. But I am mean spirited at heart. I am a snob. And the internally contradicting art speak I also find very obnoxious when it is both a this and a this. There are things that are about the contradiction, and that's interesting, but it's not like 75% of the art we see is not an actual contradiction. So maybe part of the impetus for doing that is sort of preparing for failure. If you say it is both blue and orange, if people say, I don't see any blue, oh, but it is also orange. So it is still successful.
Well, as a teacher, you are training students, or maybe another way to put it is you have the power to influence students towards or away from said art speak, correct?
One would hope.
Okay.
One thing I try to do is not just parrot art speak to them, but talk about how it makes me feel and also be honest. You know, like I grew up in a very conservative culture, and so seeing a lot of sexuality depicted in art, it makes me uncomfortable. And it's not a problem with the art, but I am a viewer, and so I want to be honest that this is how this I am feeling looking at it, and that is part of what is happening with the art. and I don't want to pretend it's not happening. And I think that that's also uncomfortable to be honest with young people about what their work is doing, as opposed to kind of shielding yourself behind art history. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is great teaching. I brought up this conversation you and I had with a friend about art speak, and she said that for her one of the words that is like the obnoxious word is a word I was about to use, pedagogy. So I don't know if this is responsible pedagogy, but I try to, when I talk to students about their work, I don't want to just rattle off other artists for them to look at, because I am not interested in art that's just this sort of cyclical art, looking at other art. I try to think about what is in a broader culture that their art may be referencing or that will broaden what they look at versus, oh, you're doing this, you got to go look at this other artist who does this very similar thing. I don't know how helpful that is. And I also figure they're getting that from their other instructors as well. But I just remember in crits for me, that was not super helpful. That was homework, which is important in school, but it wasn't really telling me what it's doing. It is just telling me here are more successful people doing the same thing, figure out how to not rip them off so clearly. And I don't know, there's so little money in art. I don't want to just train people to Google other artists. I want to make them think about what does this art do and what is it talking about. And sometimes we don't quite know for a while.
I think that's very useful, productive feedback for your fellow pedagogicals and just for artists, actually, because I am guilty of having done that on occasion, but I've also definitely been the recipient of it. And I think it is the equivalent of saying, oh, do you know about this guy who's doing more interesting version of this?
Yeah.
Right.
And usually you do know about that guy. You know, I know, yes, I know about that guy. Guess what? A lot of people can do art about chairs. That's fine. It's a ubiquitous object. We all get to do stuff about things that we see every day.
Yeah.
They don't own the thing.
Right. They don't own the thing. So we've been talking in segments for the last 2.5 hours. If you don't count the tech part, let's
Oh,
say.
God.
But I think what our experience has been, perhaps for lack of a better word, is segmented.
Mm.
And that's not quite in the A list of art words. I'd say it's probably in the B list.
Uh, I feel like we could come up with a better art word for segmented.
Okay.
Partitioned,
That's
maybe?
pretty good. That's pretty good. What about compartmentalized?
Compartmentalized, pretty good. We could go with divorced also, maybe.
Divorced from.
I
Yeah.
just googled the word and thesaurus to be clear.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Okay. Great. Well, Camilla, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time and for all of the thoughtful wording and experiencing that you
thank
talk
you.
about.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are out.